very much, Paula. I can't tell you how excited we are to be here today for the Moving Words Writers Across Minnesota event featuring the extraordinary talents of Andrew DeYoung, Nicole Helgett, David LaRochelle, and Cal Kalia Yang. Hopefully you heard everybody's name there, but I have name tags as well. So.
We greatly appreciate the partnership of the Marshall-Lyon County Library in hosting this event. As Paula said, I'm Elaine Hopkins. I'm the Director of Programs and the Minnesota Book Awards for the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. We've been running the statewide Minnesota Book Awards program for 12 years now, and are thrilled to be able to celebrate the amazing writers that we have in our state. You might wonder, what is a St. Paul Friends organization doing running a statewide event like the Book Awards, much less presenting a program here in Marshall? But we do this under the auspices of the Library of Congress Center for the Book. We're the Minnesota affiliate, and as such, we do statewide programming that supports libraries, reading, and literacy, and our Book Awards program and the whole Moving Words Writers Across Minnesota tour is part of that programming. We have some information about the Minnesota Center for the Book over on the book table, and so please check that out during the course of the evening. On to the main event. The Moving Words series is presented by Bnsf Railway Foundation, and additional support is provided by the University of St. Thomas Libraries and graduate programs in English, Harlan Boss Foundation for the Arts, and Education Minnesota. The series is made possible in part by the state of Minnesota through a grant to the Minnesota Department of Education and the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. We'll have readings from each of our wonderful authors, followed by a conversation and a Q&A with you. There are full biographies in the program, so please check those out, along with an evaluation, and I'll remind you about that at the end of the evening. There are books available for sale, so you can see me after the program if you'd like to purchase a copy of any of these books by these writers, and I'm sure they'd be willing to sign them after the program. We also have ASL interpreter Daryl Esterday joining us today, so please, if you'd like, you can let him know if you're making use of his interpretation. So, to start things off, we will begin by welcoming to the podium Cal Kalia Yang.
Hi, can you all hear me? Thank you for being here. Elaine, thank you for taking us all the way to Marshall this week. I've seen Elaine, I think, once a week for the last several weeks, so it's lovely. I've been using this tour to try out new material. So I just wrote this about 3 weeks ago. I turned in the manuscript a week and a half ago. So you're all the first people to hear from this. It's from my new book, my forthcoming book, Somewhere in the Unknown World, out next fall through Metropolitan Press. It's a book about refugees from across the spectrum. So I'm taking on the stories of 13 different refugees. So like the first chapter is Syrian, and then then I have an Afghani man, and then I move to the Iraqi, and I move all the way back to like the last 50 years of war around the world. And so I end with Southeast Asia with the Cambodian boy Pol Pot. But this is the in-between part. This one is called Nautilus, Same Old Tired World. The woman laid on the sofa, her head on its leathery arm, her cell phone in her hand. She put on weight. With each breath she took, her stomach rose, a soft mound of flesh beneath the polyester shirt she wore. She needed a haircut. Her black hair kept short had grown long, its strands covering most of her eyes like a teenage boy's. Her hair hadn't been this greasy since the days when she worked the night shift and then spent the days caring for her young children. The time she could use to wash her hair, she used to sleep instead. She looked sluggish, sagging flesh and clothing, sitting there on the sofa, her iPhone in her hands. The woman spent all of her time looking at flowers on the internet. She knew how to find and save the photos, flowers everywhere, from around the world. The tulip fields of Holland, the orchids of Thailand, the beautiful Buddhist lotus ponds, the purple heathers abloom on the English moors. Once she saved the photos, she spent hours editing them, changing the filters and cropping the images. She had over 11,000 pictures on her phone. Sometimes she was afraid. She saw black things move across the living room floor, the size of cats. Her eyes frantic, she made no sounds. Instead, she froze in place, the only movement her eyes helplessly searching for an exit from her body. She had vivid dreams full of handsome men who came into her life on horses. They all wanted to marry her and take her far away. In the dreams, she wanted to go with them, except she couldn't quite lift herself off the ground and onto their high horses. Her body was heavy in her dreams, anchored firmly to the earth. Sometimes she woke up reaching for the handsome men, only to feel the empty, lonely air of their absence. She couldn't sleep at night without her drugs. Even with them, in the day she was tired, drowsy, had no heart for anything or anyone. Sometimes she cried for her dead father. It had been nearly half a century since his death, but to her it was as fresh as the morning. She believed she knew where he was, always at the edge of the horizon. There he waited for her with wings like the birds. He sent messages to her. He offered a promise to lift her up high so that they could soar through the skies together. From there, he told her she wouldn't have to miss her kids because she could still see them on Earth. Most of the time, though, she spent her days on the sofa looking at her phone. She did not have the energy to cook or clean, two things that she'd always attended to as a matter of life and death. In the past, no matter how little sleep she was functioning on, she made traditional meals with no store-bought sauces and little fat for her family. She boiled fish with lemongrass, tomatoes, green onions, culantro, mint, basil, red hot chili peppers, cilantro, a touch of MSG, and then salt to taste. She made bowls of rice and tofu and chicken soup. Her children loved her mung bean thread soup with minced pork and green onions and cilantro, black pepper galore. As they ate, she stood at the sink waiting to wash each plate, bowl, spoon, and fork. Now, she herself was never hungry, and her children's hunger held no power to get her up. All her life, no matter where they were, in the refugee camps or the housing projects of Minnesota, she and her husband's bedroom was a place where the bed was always made, the floor clean, a space where clothes were folded in baskets, hung in closets, stored in drawers. No matter the mess beyond its doors, the chaos of the unsteady world was never allowed to enter. Now she placed a blanket on the floor. The mountain of clean clothes that needed to be folded and put away was nearly as high as their rumpled bed. Now the dust of their lives had settled onto her body and had grown so thick that she could barely move. Her husband, too used to the woman from the past, perhaps hoping that she would return in light of the current condition of their room, did not pull the covers over the sheets in the mornings or sit to fold the clothes, so the pyre grew higher and higher. At the doctor's office, the nurses gave her evaluations, worksheets for her to circle her emotions on. How strong they were, how much pain she was in. On the question of pain, it was always physical, never otherwise. Each time she said the same, the doctor increased the dosage of her prescriptions. When one prescription did not work, the doctor shifted to another. The woman was put on Wellbutrin, Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Effexor, Cymbalta, and more. One pill made her believe that she was on the cusp of death. Her heart would start racing. She grew short of breath. She spoke her death wishes. Keep things simple at the funeral. I don't want anything fancy. Follow the rudimentary details of tradition. At the doctor's office on the suicide question, she shook her head adamantly and said, "My biggest fear is that I'll die and leave my children behind. I would never kill myself." She wept. The doctor asked why she was so sad. She answered, "I don't know what to do with myself. I am out of work. I'm too young to be useless. My children need a mother who can take care of them." The doctor wanted her to go into the world. Yes, she could no longer find a job with her shoulder being so bad, her disability documented, but perhaps she could volunteer at a community organization. She couldn't drive. She didn't speak good English. Her hands hurt, her feet hurt, her neck hurt. She was falling apart. The doctor said that he could not change the conditions of the woman's life, and then the only thing he could do was change the conditions of her head. No one knew what to do with her heart. Her fiery heart, the heart of the little girl, the only one in her village to go to school, to race in front of the boys in the classroom. The heart of the young woman who chose love in a war full of death and despair, made a call to build a life from a world falling apart. The heart of the mother who would place each of her children, alive and dead, before herself with no misgivings or regret. The heart of a wife who did everything hard so that her husband, in a world that had given up on him, could not give up on her, thus their life together. Now her heart was hurt. The pills made the woman so tired she could not fret about the going-ons into the world. They numbed her body so she could not feel the pain in her hands, her feet, or her neck. They glued her together in a bubble of despair. The doctor could not change the conditions of the woman's life, but he made it so that the woman could not interact with them. Each day, the woman floated further and further away, all by herself, in a bubble full of flowering images framed and filtered. One day, the bubble rose high, a brisk wind blew, and it lifted far into the clouds of another world. The woman became a shining particle in the wide openness of everything. This was, of course, only her fondest fantasy. Thank you so much.
My name is David LaRochelle, and I feel a little bit embarrassed here talking to you about my books and reading. Kalia and Nicole and Andrew have written very moving, as we've heard, and deep and very complex novels and memoirs, which they won the Minnesota Book Award for. I'm here to read a book that I won the book award for that consisted of one word. I've been writing children's books this is the 30th year now since my first children's book was published. And I was interested in seeing if I could write an entire book using just one word. And I decided on the word moo. And I think part of the reason I decided on the word moo is because of this. Do you know what this is? This is one of these noisemakers where if you turn it over, it would moo if it wasn't so old. My friend Gary gave this to me many, many years ago for Christmas, and when he gave it to me, I named it Bossy. And soon after this, Gary got one for himself, and he named his Daisy. And Gary would call me up on the phone, and I'd say, oh, Bossy's in the kitchen making popcorn now. And Gary would start making up stories about Daisy. And I always tell people that if you're not married, and if you don't have kids, or if you don't have pets, you will begin making up stories about inanimate objects, which is what Gary and I did. So anyway, that was the reason I decided to use the word moo. And I jotted down in my notebook all the different ways you could say moo, with different punctuation, size, and all that. And then I put together a little black and white dummy of the book. First pages were moo, moo, and next page, moo. And I sent this to my editor, an editor I'd worked with. And the very same day that my editor got this in the mail, he called me up on the phone and he said, David, I want to put everyone in the office on speakerphone, which he did. And he said, we have one thing to say to you. Moo. And he said he wanted to publish the book. And Andrew and I were talking about how long you have to hear back from it. Oh my goodness, the first day that he got the story he wanted to publish, it's an author's dream come true. I wanted to be the illustrator for the book, so I told him I would send him some sample illustrations, which I did, which he didn't care for. So I sent him some other illustrations, and he said that wasn't quite right either. So I sent him some other illustrations, and I didn't hear back from him. And a year passed, and I said, well, you could have another illustrator, that would be fine with me. Then a second year passed, and a third year passed, and now he was not even answering my emails anymore. And here I was thinking I was going to get this book published on the very first day I sent to him, and now he was not even responding to it. And I knew that I would have to send this to a different editor. But I still wanted to be the illustrator. I was struggling to come up with drawings, And at this time, in the mail, a friend of mine sent me a postcard that had a painting that he was showing at a gallery. And on that painting was a cow. And when I saw his cow, I said, that is how I want the cow to look for my book. Usually, editors do not want the illustrator and the author to go find an illustrator. But because my friend, Mike Winutka, had illustrated plenty of books, we thought maybe we could present these together. So we sent my dummy, along with Mike Winutka's illustration of a cow, to an editor that he had worked with before, and within a month we had a contract for the book. So that was a great relief for all of us. And that is my book, Moo. And I am fortunate in writing picture books that I can read my entire book to you tonight, which is what I will do. I am the author, illustrated by Mike Winutka, who is a Minnesota illustrator as well, and he's also an author because he's written several picture books. And to do this book justice, I need to start with the dedication page. It is dedicated to Bossy and Daisy, because without them, the book would never have been published. And the book goes like so. And hopefully, even in the back, can you see the pictures? Because obviously, this book is not going to make a lot of sense if you can't see the pictures. Goes like so. Moo. And the farmer is putting a sign on his car for sale. Moo. 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 Moo moo. 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 And she landed in the police car. Moo moo. Moo 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 moo. Moo 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 moo. Moo moo. Moo moo moo. Moo 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 moo. Moo 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 moo. Moo. Moo, 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 moo. Moo, 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 moo. Moo. And even if I ask kindergartners what you think the cow is saying, they always know. She's saying, me. Bah! And that is how my book goes. Thank you.
I want David to read my book for me. Yeah. I'll do better next time. Hello, I'm Nicole Helgett, and I'm kind of from your neck of the woods. I live just outside of St. Peter, Minnesota. So for all of us, that's sort of close, right? And my book is called The End of the Wild, and it's about a young girl who lives in a small town and tries to create this relationship with a random dog. I was told to stop writing about dogs because they're cliche, but I just can't stop. A hint of winter is on the morning wind. Waist-long, walnut-colored hair slaps my face. A gray tendril grows from just behind one ear. I don't know why I have gray hairs at 11 years old. I just do. My eyes are gray too. Steel, actually, is what Toivo, my stepdad, says. Like what my nerves are made of, he says. If you ask me, my eyes are way too big, like an alien's. A wild pack of family dogs yaps along Milner's property fence. One's got black ears pointed upward. Another dog, short and squat, has brown ears down long. He keeps his nose high, so his ears don't drag on the ground. One dog has nubs where his ears should be, and another, a mottled terrier that licks his nether regions, has one ear northwest and one ear southeast. An ugly pup, spotty and short-furred, has a wood tick the size of a dime attached to the side of his eye. A few regular-sized canines of other dog colors scratch their ears. They bite away chunks of mud from between their toes. They bark at me and make a tetchy racket. In total, they're a gang of 8 or 9 canines belonging to our neighbor, Horace Milner, who is a killer. I call one of them Ranger. He's a yellow and brown German shepherd. The fur around his muzzle is silver with age. He stares at me as though he is full of big thoughts. Ranger has a way about him that is different from other dogs. It is a way about him that I like. He's a no-nonsense kind of dog. He's wily and smart and courageous. There are just some things you can tell about animals by watching them as long as I've watched these ones. I pat my hand to my thigh. Here, boy, I say. Here, Ranger. Ranger cocks his head sideways. I'd like to have Ranger for myself. Milner doesn't deserve such a fine animal. Ranger turns and pretends to ignore me. He steps his front paws up and down a little, as though he's considering it, jumping the fence and running to me. I inch my boot forward toward the fence and slowly raise my hand out in front of me. Ranger turns his ears and puts his nose up, but he doesn't spook off. My boot scratches along the gravel road again. Ranger's tail lifts up. It's okay, I coax. I'm not going to hurt you. It's okay. The other dogs glance back and forth between Ranger and me as I creep forward. That's a good dog, I say. When I'm within touching distance, the fur on the back of Ranger's neck stands up. One of the other dogs growls low, so low that even though I can barely hear it, my neck vibrates. Ranger snaps at that dog. I jump back. Okay, I say, okay. I back away from the pack. One last time I lean over and pat my thigh. Here, boy, I say. He doesn't come, though. He must feel some loyalty to the rest of those wretched animals. Suit yourself, I say, and turn away. No one is awake yet here out in the country. We live about a mile outside of Coulter, a small Michigan town, which has got a school, a community college, a beauty parlor, 2 churches, 1 cemetery, a few bars, Grandpa's pipe factory, a couple of auto garages, and not much else except for a lot of nosy people. This morning, the sunrise cuts like glass shards across the emptied cornfield, spills over the gravel road, and spears into the grove. The brown and orange leaf canopy shivers with the wind. Oak trees hold on to their leaves in autumn, even as the rest of the trees lose theirs. I spy an oak with full branches. This time of year, middle of October, hen of the woods mushrooms glow in layered bunches at the base of oaks. They are bark-colored, tan, brown, and gray, and have leaf-shaped petals. From my back pocket, I pull a canvas bag and drape it over my shoulders like a shawl. I wish I had grabbed my jacket, even if it is already too small. I need a new one, but I hate to bring it up with Toivo. We're always broke or cash-strapped, as Toivo says. That just means we have no money. At the base of the oak tree, I stop. A hen of the woods mushroom grows near the gnarled roots. With my pocket knife, I slice the mushroom from its stem and slip it into the bag. Who's in trouble? Hen of the woods are very good eating, if you ask me. They taste like turkey or chicken. They even chew up in a birdie respect. A bright stick of white pokes out from some leaves. After brushing the leaves aside, I find a bone, the leg bone of a deer it looks like to me. I take that too. On my walk back home, I pass where the dogs were. I set the bone near the fence. I have a hunch Ranger will know it's from me. By the time I'm halfway home, the sun is a big egg yolk. The air out here swipes like long cat nails against my face, but I just smile. Out here, my stomach isn't knotted about being hungry. My fingers don't tingle in panic over having no money. My breath isn't clipped short over minding my unruly brothers. My head doesn't burn with worry over my undone homework. Soft, quick footsteps pad behind me. I stop and perk my ears. The footsteps stop too. I check the road and the ditch and the edges of the field and the grove. Though I don't see anyone or anything, I hear someone or something breathing wetly. The worst thing you can do when a predator has you in its sight is stand still with a hard-beating heart and a trembling upper lip. The worst thing you can do is start sweating out a scared odor. If I owned a dog like Ranger, he'd be here beside me right now, ready to attack whoever or whatever is out there waiting to kill me. I walk again with my fist clenched. I scan the ground for a weapon-suited stone or stick. After a few paces, footsteps rustle behind me again. I reach down and take up a forked branch, perfect for jabbing 2 eyes with one stab. I spin with my weapon raised.
Thanks for being here, everybody. My name is Andrew DeYoung, and my book is called The Exo Project. It's a science fiction novel about 2 young people who live on opposite sides of the galaxy but are set on a collision course to meet and have a somewhat complicated confrontation. And it's set on a distant planet, but what I'm thinking about today here in Marshall, Minnesota is how Midwestern and in many ways Minnesotan this book is in the landscape that it describes. I just spent about 2.5 hours riding from St. Paul, looking out the window at this landscape dusted with snow, view all the way to the horizon. I don't get many views like that in St. Paul. It's very rare that I get to see all the way to the horizon, but it's a view very similar to the one that I grew up with. I lived at the edge of a small town on a blacktop road. Across the street was a cornfield, and I could see all the way to the horizon. And I do remember as a boy watching tornadoes touch down about a mile away. It's a beautiful landscape, but it's also a scary one that makes you feel very small in relief against it. And lo and behold, when it came time to write my science fiction novel, the distant planet that I described turned out to be a prairie planet. So you can't escape the place that you're from. Even the science fiction writers among us are regional writers. So the scene I'm going to read is about a girl who sneaks away from her village to watch the sunset, and then something happens. Kiva went out from the village to watch the Great Mother set in a blaze of red on the horizon, then wait for the 3 sisters to blink on in the night sky. This was her tradition, her private ritual. She allowed no one to see her, no one to follow her as she slipped away from her father's hut on the edge of the village. As she came over the rise, a lip of rock separating the village from the surrounding plain, she paused to watch the wind ripple over the grass, a sudden tessellation of lines dancing in shifting patterns across the prairie before disappearing once more as the air went still. She walked down into the low, flat expanse, her fingers trailing in the purple and brown grasses, clutching at the tips. She lay down in her favorite spot against the swell of a small hillock and waited. Waited for the time that was neither night nor day, a thin cusp between the light and the darkness. As the Great Mother inched toward the horizon, Kiva felt the stirrings of something she couldn't quite name welling up inside her. Slowly, an image began to take shape in her mind, a blue orb, cloud-dappled, suspended in deep blackness. And then, at the moment that the last red-rimmed sliver of sun fell below the curve of her planet, a sharp agony seized Kiva. Her body convulsed with the force of the pain, her stomach and back clenched tight, and her heels ground deep into the grass. Kiva's eyes clamped shut as above the 3 sisters, the moons of her planet, began to glow in the darkening sky. In the far distance, the twins had entered into the part of their orbit where they appeared to dance together, their 2 white orbs seeming to merge into a single elongated mass. The 3rd moon passed by in a closer orbit, near enough to the planet that, had her eyes been open, Kiva could have traced the moon's path with her finger as it spun across the sky. As it was, Kiva merely felt her hair float next to her ears in the pull of the gravity as the moon passed overhead. And when the pale white sphere was directly above her, nearly lifting her entire body off the ground, The pain sharpened to an agonizing point in her chest as images fluoresced on her eyelids. An explosion of light and fire, a sea of stars whizzing past in the blackness, a huge bird made of polished stone coming through the clouds to land on the prairie, and 3 dark silhouettes standing shoulder to shoulder on the horizon. Then the moon spun on, releasing Kiva's body from its grip. The strands of her hair fell and pooled again on the ground. When the moon had disappeared over the horizon, the images on Kiva's eyelids faded, and the pain loosed its hold on her body. Her eyes snapped open, her lungs gasping for air. Strangers. The word came to her unbidden. They're coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much for those readings. It's pretty incredible about the range of human and animal existence you can get in just half an hour. I would love to have each of you talk a little bit about, since all of you have works for youth, I know, and Kalia, hopefully you can tell everyone what's coming. What inspires you about writing for young people, from the picture book level on up, and why you have in some cases been doing it for quite some time, and why you chose to start there.
So I wrote this novel for the young adult audience, which is teen, and if you were paying attention to the reading, there was a mention of in between time, before the sunset or during the sunset. What really fascinates me about childhood, but particularly adolescence, is that it's a in-between time. There's so many aspects of life that in that period where you're still a kid, but you're also practicing for adulthood, and you're starting to graduate, literally sometimes, into that adult world in ways that you're ready for and not ready for. I think that in-between transitional moments are always fascinating and fertile ground for fiction, and it's one of the things that really attracts me to writing for young people.
Thanks. I write for kids for a lot of different reasons, but recently I've been really focusing on rural children. I have many children, as some of you may or may not know. I have 6. My oldest is 22 and my youngest is 8. And several of them are really eager readers. But I was noticing that publishing has changed so much that there was a very, very strong urban protagonist in a lot of the stories. And so I just felt really I felt a lot of pressure to write something that my own kids could read and see themselves reflected in the characters. Another reason that I write for kids, and this is going to sound kind of cold, is that at the time when I did, it was just a good financial decision for me. And I think it's okay to say that. There's a lot to be said about the art of writing, but sometimes you have to make an economic decision too. I had been writing for adults for a while and was working on a new project, and I thought it might be young adult and possibly even adult, but I sent it to my agent and she said, it's a really good story. If you could change the protagonist's age to about 12, I could sell it for a lot more money. And so I was looking at my bank account, and it's really bad. And I'm like, yeah, I can totally do that. So that's what I did.
I think I've always written for young people, and very young people, and I think the reason that I do is because mainly I've just never grown up myself. And I think that's the truth. I still think I think like a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old. I was a 4th grade teacher, and my mother used to say, well, my son never really graduated from 4th grade. And there's a lot to be said for that. The books that I enjoy reading for pleasure now are often young adult or middle grade novels, and I adore picture books. There's something also very rewarding about writing for very young people and writing stories that'll be the first books that they enjoy. I remember how much I loved books growing up, and to think now that I'm writing books that young kids enjoy is very rewarding. One of the best responses I ever had about one of my books was the book Moo that Mike Wanuka and I did. There was a teacher, a kindergarten teacher, who would read it to her class, and they enjoyed it, so she read it several days. And she had a lot of students in her class who were English learners. English wasn't their original language. And one of the nice things about the book Moo is it's a universal language. Anyone can read it. And one day she did not read the book because, as parents, you can only read that book so many times before you're sick of it. And a boy from China who had never spoken English before in her class spoke his first English sentence, and it was, "Where is Moo book?" And there's nothing more rewarding than that, to be able to speak to someone and instill that love of books.
Thank you. I don't know if you all know, but I'm taking lots of notes from these three. My first book, The Late Homecomer, my second book, The Song Poet, they're both adult books, but they've been taught widely. One of the first residencies I did in the schools was working with a classroom of fifth graders on The Late Homecomer. And one of the Chandra Meech was the teacher's name. She taught at the Mall International School in Minneapolis, which is a public school. But there was this boy who never read, who said he hated words, and that was the first book that he sat down to read. And so in my head and in my heart, I carried the image of this very cool-looking Hmong boy sitting with my book in his hands, and that image stays with me. The first time my husband, Aaron Hokinson, balding, white, lots of facial hair, glasses, looks like he comes from these parts. But the first time he came to visit my house, my mom sat on a chair. Of course, my mother and I are exactly the same height, so she's short. My mother was sitting looking at Aaron, and Aaron said, my mother sat with her feet crossed, swinging on the chair, like I'm doing right now, except you can't see it. And he thought there was something so childish about my mom, which has always been the way I've seen my mom. Whenever we go to the farmer's market and there are these older Hmong ladies, my mom would say, "What do you do with this or that?" And they're like, "You're so old and you don't know." And my mom's like, "Oh, I don't know." She goes into this world with that kind of vision that she doesn't know, that she wants to learn. And so I was raised by her. Right? From my earliest age, I remember looking to the sky and the earth for my metaphors. The changing of the sky. That's, one day I saw a very stormy sky, and I'm like, that's exactly my feelings. Couldn't put it into words, but it was the image, On another day, there were white tulips blooming because it was springtime. And I just felt so beautiful, and I'm like, that's how I feel. The way I look at the world hasn't changed. I haven't grown very much. I haven't grown since 5th grade. Not even a centimeter. I've been waiting for a long time. Didn't happen, When my teachers see me, my elementary school teachers, and I never talked as a kid, so they don't know my voice. I was a selective mute growing up. They hear my voice and they would cry, but they say, "We know you because you look the same. You look at the world in the same way." So these things are happening all around me. And then all of a sudden I had kids. I started reading to them. And I've been to racial kids. And I'm obviously Hmong. There were no books by Hmong authors that centered Hmong protagonists, Hmong children, the magic of our lives. And so I wanted to do that. I wanted to do it for my kids. But my first book, I'm Happy to the World, I actually am writing because of Bob, my neighbor. He's this old white guy who's 92 this year. When we first moved into the house 3 years ago, his wife Ruth died. And Bob would sit outside his driveway and look at us with the little babies crawling on the ground, and he would sit there and sob. And so one day my kids wanted to go over, and my sister's kids were there. We went to visit Bob because he was sobbing. He was crying, looking at us. And they said, "Can we draw on your driveway, Bob?" And Bob is like, "Go ahead." And so I'm talking to Bob. He's telling me about how he and Ruth have been in love for 60 years and how nothing is the same now without her. And I have in the space beside him. And the kids are drawing. Once, Bob and I are done, we looked and they had drawn this huge map. And Bob said, "What did you draw from me?" And my nephew went up to Bob and he said, "I drew you a map into the world, Bob." We follow the arrows leading to the grass where the grass was waiting to be mowed. Follow an arrow leading to the garden where the vegetables are wilting. Then there was this huge line and we followed all the way to the street, and there they'd drawn the whole world smiling. And they said, "Just in case you need a map, Bob." And Bob said, "I do." And I thought, there you go. There's my first children's book, this memory in this moment. It's going to combine all of the other moments, right? And then, of course, you redefine yourself because you're writers and we're continually identifying and redefining, the things we identify in the world. So I decided that instead of being just a writer of the things that mattered, I also wanted to be a writer that young people can grow up with. So I have middle grade novels in the works, playing with young adults in my head. After The Map into the World, I have 6 other more books sold already for children, coming out from the University of Minnesota Press, and then Carol Rhoda again, and in other conversations. I do what I do because there aren't a lot of Hmong American writers like me doing the work that I do. There's incredible need. I have one life to live. And in that life, there are many hours. So why not go in all of the directions that are pulling at me? That's why I do it.
Okay, so my students, my ESL students, we read your late newcomer as for a literature circle, and we actually were trying to get you to come to our school to speak, but then we went through agents and it was $7,000. We're like, okay, a little out of our budget. So they had some questions for you, and I know one of the questions, and I was trying to get them to come tonight, but they all had to work with something else, so I said it's fine, I'll come. But I remember one of the questions they wanted to ask you was, do you remember the part in your book when you were going to go look at that woman that passed away and you tripped?
Yes.
And they wanted to know if you were still haunted by the ghost of that woman.
What a wonderful question. If you had emailed me personally, this shouldn't leave this room. Okay, I have an agent. I have a speaking agent. I have him for a reason. But if you contact me directly, it's much easier for me to say yes and much harder for me to say no. But the reality is that the woman, I was 5 years old, and for those of you who haven't read the book, we were in the transition camp to America, and I'd never seen a dead body before, despite the fact that I'd grown up in this camp where suicide was the #1 cause of death, and all these people were killing themselves day in and day out. But that in that transition camp, one of my uncles was sick, and so we went to the hospital to visit him. And beside him, there was an old woman who I knew was a grandma because she was as old as my grandma, But she had a plastic covering, and a lot of her intestines were out, and she was surrounded by a swarm of flies. But we visited my uncle every day, and she just lay there barely breathing. And then my uncle got better and came home, and we heard that she died. And so in Bambinai refugee, Pananikum transition camp to America, the funeral hut is just like an open air hut. So you have like a roof, you have walls, but open doorways. And that day we agreed that we were all going to go. I was the youngest in the group, but I wanted to be the bravest naturally. And so in the Hmong culture, we believe that if you fall before the body of a dead person, then they get your spirit. Now, if the circumstances were different, things could have been handled differently. But it was my turn. I was the last to go. And I was looking all I could see was this woman, the figure I thought of naturally a woman, sleeping, lying down, her belly ballooning before like a pregnant woman. So I was looking, and then they yelled my name, and I started running. There was a rock, and I fell down. And then all the other kids ran away. And my older sister, Dao, who had polio in the camp as a child, one of her legs is slightly shorter than the other. And so she always limped, and people called her the handicapped one, but she was the only one running toward me. And when she came, she wiped off the dirt. She's like, we can't tell anyone. If we tell anyone, we're never going to be invited to go with anyone again, anywhere. So I didn't tell anyone. And that night, my first night after that experience, so we didn't have rooms, people. We had like a big room like this, and then sheets in between family groups, and then there was a doorway. And my dad slept here. I slept beside him. My older sister, my mom, all on the ground, on cement ground. But I looked, and beside her, I could see through the light of the falling moon the figure of the woman standing up. She was as tall as a doorway, and she was just staring there, looking at me like this. And so from that night on, every single time I looked, she would be there waiting for me once she knew that my mom and dad had gone to sleep, so I couldn't sleep forever. There were many, many a night when my father took me outside where the guards were waiting with the highlights overhead, and we'd sleep on the hard ground, his arm cradling me from the rocks, looking up at the stars above. When we came to America, I'd hoped that this woman could follow me. I'd hoped that she would stay in Thailand because I knew that there were lights in America in every single house. Where would she hide, right? I was going to burn her to death with all the lights. That was my plan. Oh, no. That did not happen. She followed me to America. In America, there were also basements who nobody told me about, right? Especially in Minnesota. You know, rooms underneath the ground to hold nothing but darkness. And so she came with me. It wasn't until we got to the Section 8 haunted house in America where there was another spirit, the spirit of a dead boy in that house, and that spirit chased her, I think, away. Because after that house, she stopped following me, and I think she stopped following me because that boy had more to say to me than she did. You know, so you can tell your students that. Yeah. Thank you for teaching my book, and thank you for being here. And they're the reason why I keep writing.
So David and I were talking earlier, and he said you've got some new books coming out with Mike. So want to tell us, can you give us a little preview?
Well, I just feel very fortunate to have other books with, I could be using my teacher voice, but I'll use the microphone instead. Very fortunate to have other books coming out with Mike Wanuka. As I said, so seldom do authors get to know their illustrators, and so seldom do you get to do a book with someone who's a very good friend. So we had our second book come out called This Is Not a Cat, and I was much more wordy in that one. I used a total of 5 words. So if you could read the 5 words in the title, you could read the whole book. Mike is working on the illustrations for our third book together called See the Cat, 3 Stories About a Dog. And we just signed the contract for our 4th book together, which is called How to Apologize. And it has been one of the highlights of my career to be doing books with a friend of mine. So I'm just so tickled about that.
We'll give you some time to meet all of the authors individually, but I thought maybe we'll just end with one more question. What is one thing that you found surprising about your life as a writer? Or a recent discovery that you've been really sure? Oh,
So one thing that I've found surprising, this is my first book, and I've been writing for a long time, and I always dreamed of being published. You know, that was the reward, right? You dream of getting the reward. Now that I'm published, it turns out that the reward was the writing. You know, like I was there all along, like writing, that was the fun part. Creativity, that's the fun part. And this is something that I learned from the process, but it's also something that I've learned from my daughter. My daughter really likes to color and tell stories. She's like 3, but she doesn't care if she's good. You know, she doesn't care if her drawings get hung in a museum. She just is having fun. And I hope that she never loses that, because like creativity and play, like we all deserve to experience that. And it's its own reward. So that's the thing that I've discovered, is that, you know, getting published, like that's really great. Getting some accolades, you know, like the Minnesota Book Award, fantastic. Never gonna turn something like that down. But the writing, the playing around, you know, like coloring like a 3-year-old, that's the good stuff.
I've published for adults and kids, as I've told you already, and in fiction and nonfiction, and thought I kind of understood how publicity and marketing worked and how books were moved into readers' hands, and just sort of accepted that not many of my books were ever going to get into readers' hands. I was always going to be like, meh, you know, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 books. But with this last one, which my publishing company was not excited about, my editor told me it was boring. But I just had this sense that it wasn't. Like I was very, very confident in who I was writing for, and I was just like paying attention to my community and knew there was a need for these kinds of books. And after it came out, this like underground movement of librarians and school teachers started like buying it and talking to each other about it and blogging about it and tweeting about it. And it just was like this groundswell of support for the book. And so all of the publicity and the awards that came for this book grew out of these people who teach kids. And I was just like, yes. That was surprising.
One of the things I think was most surprising to me when I had my first book published many years ago was that as soon as the book was published, schools started asking me to come to the schools and talk about books and about writing. And that is a very different thing than writing a book yourself. As authors, we're by ourselves. A lot of us are introverts. And then all of a sudden, people are expecting you to do presentations and talk to groups of a nice small size group like this, or sometimes larger groups. And it takes a while to get used to that and to feel comfortable with doing that. So that was a surprise, where they think once your book is published, they think you know something about writing, whether you do or not.
So I didn't know very many writers growing up, and I thought that when I was done, I didn't talk. I said I was a selective mute, that I would sit and write books and they would make their way into the world, and that everybody would fall in love with them. You know, one of the first questions that young writers get is, who are you writing your book for? You know? And I always refused to answer. I always said adamantly, I'm writing first for those who would be interested and then those who wouldn't. You know, I give answers like that to the, I think, consternation of some of my professors who were trying to teach me how to become a writer in the world. The reality was that there had been quite no writer like me yet. In the Hmong community, there are writers who had started out the journey much longer, but because of work, because of family, because of these other things, they couldn't give their all to it. And so I was like the first writer to emerge out of 40 years, right, from a people that is new to what is written, because it wasn't until the 1950s that the Hmong language was, you know, put into written form by a French missionary of all people. And so when I came to it, I knew that I was going to be one of the first. I didn't know that I would be making history every step of the way. So each award, it would be the first time a Hmong author has ever been presented, you know? And then it would be the first time, like the Minnesota Book Awards has given like 3 awards to a Hmong writer, right? Everything is historical. I didn't know that the stories that I was telling here would become the stories of refugees from around the world. Until I read it at the UN, and a woman got up and said, that's my story too, I'm from Africa. Somebody from Europe got up and said, that's also my story. You know, I didn't know how, even at night when I'm lost in my dream sleeping, how my books would be in different hands, and people would wake up differently until the emails started coming in. But this book has unleashed a career where it is the public speaking that pays for the writing, which I never expected, you know. And then to be a good writer, to be a good public speaker, you have to be a good teacher. And so that forces a different level of compassion in your interactions with human beings. There is no such thing as an ignorant question. You know, you cannot answer the question that people are asking. In so many situations, I have to answer the thing that is behind their question to get all of us in that room to feel the pulse beating in our necks. The pulse of humanity, right? Because no writer's writing is ever contained within a single genre or a single, like for example, the Hmong story. No, this is a human story. That's what it's like to be human from where David is situated. You know, all of these realities and these bigger truths, you have to learn how to carry out into the world in voice. My daddy says that when I write on the page, I'm writing on the page. When I speak, I'm writing on the fabric of the human being. You know, when I get to teach, I get an opportunity to build a relationship that will last for all of time, long after I'm gone. And so these things are all new discoveries. I discover new things all the time on this journey.
Thank you all so very much for your thoughts and your stories and your attention and being here on this surprisingly snowy evening. I said I would mention this before, and I will do it again. The evaluations are in your program. Please take a brief moment and fill that out. We greatly appreciate your feedback, and so would our grant funders. Paula has pencils if you need one. There's also a spot on the back of the evaluation. If you would be willing to be contacted via email for a follow-up survey, you can put your email there, and then if you fill out that survey, you can enter to win tickets to the Minnesota Book Awards or win finalist books as prizes and all kinds of good things. I am not above bribery. Thank you again to Paula and the Marshall Lyon County Library. Thank you to the friends of the library here who have provided these marvelous refreshments. So please take advantage of them and take a look at the books for sale there. And once again, thank you so much, Andrew, Nicole, David, and Kalia, and all of you. Have a good evening.